Well, good morning, you sexy mother hubbards. It's time for an alternative paper review. First up to the Sunday People, Andrew's daily massages at Epstein's mansion. Daily massages. So says the testimony that's now been released from the original Virginia Giuffre versus Ghislaine Maxwell civil suit. And what's interesting about this? Well, Prince Andrew says he stayed there for about 3 days in 2010. While now, thanks to these documents being released, it appears that the house staff at the mansion were like, oh, no. You know, Andrew was with us for like weeks. And this was after Epstein had already been arrested and convicted of procuring teenagers for the purposes of sex. So he says, I was only there for 3 days, and yes, I suppose in retrospect, maybe I shouldn't have stayed there, but it was a convenient place to stay. Meanwhile, the house staff are like, he was with us for weeks, and he was having these daily massages. Anyway, this has all put the Metropolitan Police in London in a bit of a pickle, because now Republic, an anti-monarchy activist group, are pushing the Met to explain why they're not tabling charges to Prince Andrew for sexual assault claims that were tabled against him that apparently took place in Ghislaine Maxwell's apartment in London a few years ago. Also, while we're on the subject of Andrew, it appears that the firm are looking to oust him from his royal residence. Meanwhile, he's saying, no, I'm not going anywhere. These people, man, like, just the self-confidence, the entitlement, like, Lord, please grant my children the self-confidence of a prince who believes he is just owed a mansion. Now, on the face of it, you might read this story and go, oh God, how incredibly arrogant. You know, like, oh, it makes me angry reading that. But this story actually makes me happy. It elicits joy from me because it gets me rooting for Andy. I'm like, yeah, God, you hang on in there. Let's see how this turns out. Like, it'd be a positive sort of uplifting story on its own if he was just moved out of the residence. But if it became a story where it becomes a sort of standoff, you know, he's refusing to budge and security have to come in and they drag him off and he's in the middle of like going to the toilet, just toddling around with his pants around his ankles and they throw all of his stuff out into the street. I mean, that is the actual end game where I think we all want this to arrive at. So yeah, I reckon you tough it out, Andy. You know, and worst case scenario, if you do get turfed out, you can always go and stay at some convicted sex offender's private residence. Let's move on. Sunday Express say £500 million boat gang's huge profit out of misery. And this is obviously a reference to the small boats, people trafficking gangs who were profiting out of sailing people across those treacherous English Channel waters. I'm sure it's coming from a place of compassion, Sunday Express, but it is a bit difficult to rule out that the Sunday Express are merely jealous that someone else is profiting hugely out of misery. Like profiting out of misery. Are you sure you want to tug at that thread? Finally, over to the Sunday Telegraph. Sunak, I'll cut tax by curbing welfare. I'm like, okay. So, not content with slashing back things like incapacity benefit, universal credit throughout the austerity years, now that the abysmal management of the economy, not just through the mini-budget from Truss and Kwarteng, but throughout the Tory years, you know, allowing the national debt to balloon, to eclipse our GDP. Now that we're in an economic era where those chickens are coming home to roost, i.e. we're all having to pay more tax to service that debt, now we're in a situation where it's coming to nip at the heels of the slightly better off. We've got the Prime Minister of Britain egged on by his backbenchers like, we've got to cut taxes. These taxes are too high. And they would be willing to push those who are already in poverty further into the red to be able to cut those taxes. I mean, should we just call this what it is? It is robbing from the poor to give to the rich. Don't get it twisted. Like, the poor are incredibly poor at the moment. Like, I was reading a stat the other day that Poland and other areas in Eastern Europe, like traditionally, historically, we would look at those as sort of, you know, up and coming nations, right? Well, now our poorest 20% in the UK is poorer than the poorest 20% in Poland. And now Sunak appears to be willing to drag them down further on the socio-economic ladder. And yeah, do you know what's wild? It's like, it's always these people who are the patriots, the flag wavers, isn't it? But their policies and their cruelty and their sociopathy is what's dragging the formerly Great Britain further and further down the international socio-economic leaderboards.